You know that friend of yours? The one with the Ivy League degree, the killer job, the guy who can explain quantum computing at a dinner party? Who somehow married someone who was clearly a walking red flag, or dumped his life savings into a crypto coin because a guy on a podcast seemed really confident? Yeah, that's not an accident. That's not bad luck. That's your brain doing exactly what it's designed to do. And the smarter you are, the better you are at doing it wrong.
Here's a number that should honestly keep you up at night. Researchers have found that people with higher cognitive ability are actually better at rationalizing bad decisions after they've made them, not worse. Think about that. It's not that smart people avoid dumb choices. It's that smart people are more skilled at constructing airtight, convincing arguments for why the dumb choice was actually genius. It's like giving someone a faster car and being surprised they crash harder. The horsepower isn't the problem. The driving is.
So let's talk about why this happens, because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. And honestly, that's the whole point. Intelligence, the kind we measure with tests and grades and job titles, is mostly about processing power. It's your ability to hold information, spot patterns, solve problems, argue a point. But decision-making, real-world decision-making, runs on a totally different system. It runs on something researchers call rationality, which is basically your ability to override your gut reactions, question your own assumptions, and actually update your beliefs when new evidence shows up.
And here's the kicker. These two things are only loosely connected. You can have a genius-level IQ and still have the self-awareness of a toddler having a tantrum in a grocery store. Ask anyone who's ever worked for a brilliant boss who couldn't take feedback. Now, here's where it gets personal, because I guarantee you've done this exact thing. Smart people are especially good at something called motivated reasoning. This is when you already know what you want to believe, and instead of looking at evidence honestly, your brain becomes a defense attorney.
Cherry-picking facts, twisting logic, ignoring anything inconvenient, all to build the strongest possible case for the conclusion you already wanted. And the smarter you are, the better lawyer you make for yourself. You've got more facts to pull from, more clever arguments, more mental firepower to construct a case that sounds completely reasonable to everyone, including you. Think about the friend who stayed in a relationship 3 years too long because he could explain every red flag away. He wasn't stupid.
He was too smart for his own good. He had the mental horsepower to build a whole narrative where controlling behavior was actually just passion, where the lying was actually just protecting his feelings. A less clever person might have just felt something was wrong and left. But smart people don't trust the gut feeling. They trust the argument. And they're really, really good at building arguments. This connects to something called the bias blind spot. And this one is almost funny if it wasn't so common. Studies show that people who score higher on intelligence tests are actually more likely to believe they're immune to bias. They can spot bias in everyone else beautifully. They can watch someone else make a bad decision and immediately diagnose exactly which mental shortcut led them there. But when it comes to their own thinking, blind spot, total blind spot. It's like being an amazing eye doctor who never checks their own vision. There's a reason for this, and it's not arrogance exactly, though it can look like it. It's that intelligence gives you confidence, and confidence feels like proof. When you're used to being right, when you've spent your whole life being the smart one in the room, being the one people come to for answers, your brain starts treating your own conclusions as trustworthy by default. You stop double-checking yourself the way you double-check someone else, because why would you? You're the smart one. Except that exact belief is what makes you skip the step where you actually verify you're right.
Let's talk about overconfidence for a second, because this is where the money really gets lost. Literally. There's a well-known pattern among professional investors and finance experts, people who are objectively excellent at math, statistics, economic theory, and yet study after study shows that overconfidence is one of the biggest predictors of bad investment decisions, and it's actually worse among people with more expertise, not better. Because expertise gives you the confidence to act boldly, but it doesn't automatically give you the humility to know when you're wrong.
You get a guy who's read every finance book, who can recite market history, who genuinely understands compound interest better than 99% of people, and he still goes all in on a single stock because his gut, dressed up in fancy analytical language, told him this one was different. It's always different. It's never different. Here's another thing nobody talks about enough. Smart people are more susceptible to what's called the sunk cost fallacy, and it's not because they don't understand the concept.
Ironically, most smart people can define sunk cost fallacy perfectly if you ask them at a dinner party. They know it's irrational to keep pouring time or money into something just because you've already invested time or money into it. They could teach a class on it. But knowing a bias exists and being immune to it in the heat of the moment are two completely different skills, and intelligence only really helps with the first one. So you get the guy who spent 6 years getting a degree he hates.
And instead of pivoting, he doubles down. Because quitting now would mean admitting those 6 years were a mistake, and admitting that feels unbearable. The smarter he is, the more elaborate the justification for staying the course. And this is the part that really gets me. Emotional reasoning doesn't disappear just because you're smart. It just gets better disguised. A less analytical person might make a decision and say, honestly, I just have a bad feeling about this. A highly intelligent person makes the exact same emotionally driven decision, but instead of admitting it's a feeling, they build a whole intellectual framework around it. They'll cite statistics, historical precedent, expert opinions, anything to avoid saying the actual truth, which is, I'm scared, or I want this to be true, or I don't want to admit I was wrong. The emotion is still driving the car. It's just wearing a really convincing disguise made of facts. There's also something worth mentioning about analysis paralysis, because smart people fall into this trap constantly. When you're used to solving problems by gathering more information, thinking harder, running more scenarios, you start to believe that more thinking always leads to better decisions. But at a certain point, more thinking just becomes a very sophisticated form of avoidance. You tell yourself you're being thorough, careful, responsible. Really, you're just scared to commit. And your intelligence gives you an endless supply of reasons to keep researching instead of acting. Meanwhile, life doesn't wait around for your perfect spreadsheet. Opportunities close. Relationships end. Windows shut while you're still building the pros and cons list. So why does this keep happening? Even to people who should know better. Even to people who literally study psychology for a living. Because knowing about a bias intellectually and catching yourself in the moment are two entirely different muscles. It's the same reason a nutritionist can still eat like garbage on a Friday night, or a therapist can still lose their temper with their own kids. Understanding a pattern from the outside does not automatically install a warning light for when you're inside that exact pattern in real time with your emotions running the show. The people who actually make better decisions over time, and this includes some folks who aren't classically smart in the traditional sense, tend to share one specific habit. They treat their own thinking with suspicion. Not self-hatred, not constant second-guessing, just a quiet, consistent willingness to ask, wait, am I believing this because it's true or because I want it to be true? That single question, asked honestly and often, does more for your decision-making than another 20 IQ points ever could. And maybe that's the most uncomfortable part of all this. We've built a culture that worships intelligence, that treats being smart as basically a superpower that protects you from screwing up your life. But intelligence was never the shield we thought it was. It's a tool, and like any tool, it can be used to build something solid or to construct an incredibly convincing excuse for the exact thing you already wanted to do. The smartest people in the world aren't the ones who never fall into these traps. They're the ones who finally accepted that they fall into them just like everyone else and stopped assuming their own brain is the one exception to the rule. If this video gave you something to think about, you can support the channel by buying me a coffee through the link in the description. It genuinely helps keep these videos coming, and every single coffee means more than you'd think. No pressure, just appreciated.